Hey everyone, welcome to the April session of Jira for Scrum Masters. Today we're going to be talking about how to decompose your epics into stories and tasks. And I'm going to show you a couple of techniques that you can leverage to really take advantage of how Jira is designed to work with you when it comes to decomposing that work. And so we're going to really be focusing on populating our backlog. We're gonna basically spend the majority of our time in this session taking a couple of epics that we worked with in the past and really talking over the dynamics and the mechanics of how do you take an epic and create stories that eventually get put into your backlog. And then in May session, so in a month from now, we're gonna go over everything that we've created, all the epics and all the stories, and I'm going to teach you how to rank them. So you're going to want to make sure you stick around for a couple of these sessions. Now, before we get too far, you all know I like to do a quick mic check. So if we can do a quick mic check, that would be very, very much appreciated. Can I get a up +1 here? Hello, Ape Tech Troll in Chief here to aggravate Alex. So Rodney, while you're there, if you could be a little bit helpful here, mic check, or mic check. Let's come back on Thursday for a mic check. That should be fun. All right. Thank you so much. All right, so again, we're going to be talking about populating your backlog. This is for Jira for Scrum Masters. A couple of friendly reminders. Again, if this is we're a quarter, more than a quarter of the way into the year, but this is your first time here. Welcome. Just so that you're aware, sessions are being recorded. They will be available on this YouTube channel after. So make sure you're smashing that subscribe button now. Slides are not available mainly because I do not work out of a whole lot of slides. So you're going to be in Jira. We're going to be in Jira, and I'm going to be teaching you from Jira. So make sure you come back to the recording in case you miss something. I'll be able to help cover that information in the replay, right? Because you'll be able to slow things down. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel. Hit that subscribe button. We are trying to get to 50,000 subscribers here quickly, as soon as possible. And so, yeah, help us get there. And you can help by just smashing that subscribe button right now. Say hello in the chat. Let me know where you're tuning in from. I'm starting to see a couple of regulars. We got Susan and Chad who are pretty much here every single week. And so thank you, Chad. Thank you, Susan, for being here. We have Rodney who's just here to troll me and throw me off guard and really just mess up my entire presentation here. So thank you, Rodney, for being here. If you have any questions about anything that I cover here, do please let me know. And I will be monitoring the chat here and trying to answer any questions that you may have. And then also stick around to the end because we have a couple of exclusive offers. And that's pretty much it. So let me tell you a little bit about me in case this is the first time you're seeing me. My name's Alex. The internet likes to call me Dr. Jira. And I'm still recovering from a crazy and hectic week last week. It was nonstop, 7:30 in the morning till about 11 p.m. every single day for like 7 straight days. It was just crazy, crazy, crazy. And so I am still not caught up on my sleep. I am still very much missing a lot of sleep. And so hopefully my voice doesn't come out so tired, right? But I am still recovering from lack of sleep from this conference. But last week, I was at Team. In case you missed it, Atlassian had their biggest annual conference of the year, Team 25 in Anaheim, California. And the TJL crew and myself were all there, and we were just making a lot of videos. So, folks, I personally caught about 200 gigabytes worth of video content. And so Rodney here, he's going through some of it. I'm going through some of it. My wife's going through some of it. We're going to have videos for like the next 6 months. It's going to be amazing how much footage we caught. And so make sure you scan the QR code. I'm going to drop a link here to the link tree, but if you could be so kind to make your way over to our Jira Life podcast, where you're going to see all the exclusive interviews and chats that we had with members of the Atlassian leadership team. I think that was one of the most important, most enabling moments of this entire conference is that the Jira Life crew, we had an opportunity to sit down with a lot of important people at Atlassian and get to hear their perspective on the announcements and things of that nature. So definitely make sure you subscribe. Make sure you go check out the Jira Life. It's in that link tree down below. So I'll actually paste it here and grab the actual link for y'all so that you can have this. But if you go down here, the Jira Life podcast, it is on Spotify, so you can do it there. Or if you prefer to see it on YouTube, which is what I prefer, it's right here. So I'm going to drop that link in the chat. But definitely go check it out because we talk to a lot of people. And if you missed Team 25, we have recap videos. We have prediction videos. We have a lot of videos on Team 25. We were there doing a lot of coverage. So go check out the Jira Life there. All right. So other than that, again, make sure you subscribe to this channel, and let's talk about what we're going to be learning today. So I'm going to cover 3 things. Number 1, I'm going to give you the invest method. In the chat, have you ever heard of the invest principle or invest method? Raise your hand. Somehow let me know in the chat. Have you ever heard of this? And if you haven't heard of it, let me know as well, because I think it's a good principle. It's something that I like to talk a lot about when it comes to creating stories. And I feel like this is very important because creating stories in Jira is an art. But it's not just an art, because it's the most critical thing, in my opinion, when it comes to figuring out what work your team needs to do. Because the biggest problem I typically see in Jira is that we have all these stories that are really truly epics. And so these stories tend to roll from sprint to sprint because these stories are just very, very big. And so I'm going to cover the invest concept first and kind of walk you through what invest means. And then we're going to show you like real world examples inside of Jira. And then I'm going to show you a couple of just different applications for how to approach the concepts that we just covered with the examples, and just help you figure it out based on where you're at in Jira. So with that said, we're going to kind of pause here. We're going to jump into invest. Actually, just user story is what you need to put into Google. And I'm not in any particular order looking at any particular website, so not sponsored by any of these things. I just clicked on the first link. We're looking at something here from LogRocket, so shout out to LogRocket. This article is from about 6 months ago, right? And so this is what we want to focus in on. So I'm going to zoom in here on the invest criteria. And again, this is just to kind of help you think about, how do we write good user stories? How do we create user stories that maximize our chances of success? We want to maximize. We want to make sure that when we have a story in Jira, that we have a high level of confidence that we're going to be successful with it. And so this is my method. This is usually what I like to evangelize here to the teams, because it's a very powerful, very easy way to kind of understand how to think about a story. Okay. And so the first thing is that invest stands for something. It stands for independent, I, negotiable, N, valuable, V, estimatable, estimable, estimatable, E, small, and testable. Okay. And when you take the first letter of all these words, we get invest. So what exactly do we mean by invest, right? And so independent. This, I think, is where a lot of teams struggle. We come out of the gate swinging hard and we miss, right? And a good story should be independent. And again, this is where I see a lot of teams. Usually they have these very overly complex stories that have a lot of dependencies, that have to work collaboratively with a lot of different teams or a lot of different team members, right? And so really you're describing an epic. And I think, again, this is where I see a lot of people trip immediately, right? Because you want to at the end of the day, you want to make sure your story is conceptually separate from and doesn't rely on other user stories. You want your stories to be as independent as possible. Granted, not always can we do this, right? There's always going to be life, and life gets in the way, and sometimes you will need to depend on other folks, right? You need to talk with others and depend on the work of others, which is okay. But you want to strive for this. This should be your mission. This should be your goal, is to make your stories as independent as possible. Because when they're independent enough, then the rest of these things are going to be a lot easier, right? And so we want to make sure that our stories are independent. And if they're not independent, you want to think about, why do we have dependencies? And my recommendation would be, make more stories. I'm a huge believer in making more stories and then grouping them with the epic. Because the smaller that story, the more independent that story is, the more likely your team is going to have all the information they need to successfully deliver that story during the sprint. But the more complex, the more intertwined that story is, the more dependencies you have with other team members or other external teams or even internal team members, then the lower your chances are that your team's going to be able to finish and deliver that story on time. And so independent, that's the very first one. That's what we're starting swinging with. Next up, negotiable. The story may evolve during the conversation until the team arrives at a balanced solution. And this is an interesting one because in the world of Agile, and specifically in the world of Scrum, uncertainty is a very real thing. And I think this is where we usually have a tug of war between a project manager and a Scrum team or a Scrum master, even, right? Because a project manager wants to have knowns, right? A project manager wants you to tell me way ahead into the future, when are we going to finish something, right? And so you're required to kind of put swags, scientific wild guesses, right, into something you don't know, right? There's so many unknowns. You just don't know enough about a project or a team unless you're carbon copy building the same thing over. There's a lot of unknowns. And so a good story should evolve, right? The whole premise of Agile is that as you're working on stuff, you're making new discoveries and you're adjusting and you're pivoting, which is a hard pill to swallow again for traditional project management because that uncertainty scares our stakeholders, right? No CTOs likes to hear, "Oh, I don't know," right? They don't like to hear the words "I don't know." They don't like to hear the words of uncertainty. And so you want to make this story negotiable enough that as you start writing your code, as you start making your discoveries, you start realizing that you're either building the right thing or you're building the wrong thing. And so you want it to be negotiable enough, right? You want to be able to adapt and evolve as you need to. I'm not saying that every story needs to be negotiable. I'm not saying that you should come in blindly every time. You should definitely have some idea of what you're trying to do here, but you wanna leave a little bit of wiggle room in that story so that you can involve it ever so slightly, right? Because remember, it's a balanced solution, right? You want to keep this kind of steady, not too steady where it's set in stone, but steady enough that it's still a solid. Valuable. This one right here is the most important part, I believe, of creating a story. When you're creating stories, the completed story meets an actual user need. It's a valuable thing. Your team will be able to sell this particular item. They will be able to make money. You can see dollar figures against that story. And I think this is where a lot of teams get tripped up because you just create stories for the sake of creating stories. And again, sometimes they're too big, right? Every story should be a valuable story. And how you groom it, how you get to value, that's a different topic for a different day. But at the end of the day, once you have a story in your backlog, it should be a valuable thing, which opens up an opportunity for discussing what does value mean. And so there's two types of values that I want you to walk away understanding here. There's value for the business, right? There's value for the company where we're going to sell whatever feature or thing we're creating. This is going to be a moneymaker. And then there's value for the team, right? Which doesn't necessarily always have value for the business. And the value for the team is very important as well because there's certain things like making a PowerPoint, standing up some AWS storage stuff, right? Your cloud infrastructure, platform engineering stuff. There's value there. There's value in your platform engineering and your DevOps, but the business doesn't really directly see the value. And so in Jira, we're going to get into this, right? In Jira, we actually have two different types of issue types or work types, right? We have a story and we have a task. And we can kind of determine whether we create a story or a task based on our definition of value. And that's usually how I evangelize stories versus tasks. Is one providing you value to you, the business, or is one providing value to the team only? Because if it's only for the team, like a platform engineering, right? You're building a new pipeline for your delivery. You're building a new unit test. Well, that's a task. But if you're creating a new functionality, you're adding a button to the UI. You're adding the ability to delete an item from a shopping cart. Well, that's a story because the business is going to get value out of that. And so that's kind of how I want you to think about value. Pretty important, I think. Again, if a story is not valuable, then why do we even have it? Okay. Up next, we have estimatable, and this I'm more torn by this. I've been on way too many calls with too many different teams that are like, "Hey, we just can't estimate, so we just don't estimate at all." Well, you want to make sure that your stories are estimatable, right? You want to have enough detail that the team can estimate its relative size. I think when stories are too big, right, when they're just so massive, our teams hide and they just give you either really, really big, far fetched numbers like a 21 on your story points, right? If you're doing the Fibonacci, the 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, right? They're going to give you the highest 21 points there. But that's mainly because they don't understand, right? You didn't do the independent, you didn't do the valuable. We're not doing the small. That's coming up next, right? Your team is just like, I don't know. I don't know what you're asking me, right? They're just very confused by the story itself. And you don't want your team to be confused when it comes to us, like when it comes to dealing with the story. And so you want to make sure that your team can estimate every single story. Now, another thing that I'll tell you about estimation here is that you want to make sure that as you're talking and thinking about how do we estimate stories, who is the people estimating, right? And so, what a lot of teams do, and I think this is a bad thing, but I don't know that there's an easy way around it, right? But most traditional teams are split. There's like the development aspect of it, and then there's like a whole QA testing aspect of it. Now, if you're a true Scrum team, right? So this is kind of where we start blurring some lines and we start dividing folks into camps. But if you're like a true Scrum team, then you should be able to do the entirety of this story. That individual, that developer, should be able to do like a little bit of the obviously the development part of it, but they should be able to do their own testing, right? And that's kind of where Agile falls into play, is where that one individual, that developer, does the ops as well, right? Hence, we have DevOps. But a lot of teams don't operate like that. A lot of teams are bigger, and they usually have dedicated resources for different parts. We have a designer, we have a tester, we have a product, right? We have a variety of different members that play different roles. And so when it comes time to estimating, a big mistake that I see a lot of teams do is that they'll take a story, it's already big to begin with, and then there's like 3 or 4 different people that need to contribute to that story. And because of this, because the story is so big, because there's so many more moving parts, then we can't complete our stories in the bounds and the constrictions of the sprint. And this is where we have a lot of bleed and a lot of carryover from one sprint to the other. But it's because, again, we're not following these rules of invest, which is why I wanted to start off with invest first to kind of get you into that mentality. And so when you are creating your stories, you not only does it need to be estimatable, but you need to consider who is estimating, because that number, that 8, that 13, that 21, that 3, that 5, that 2, that 1, whatever number that person gives you, it should encompass what's going to be done during the sprint. And so if you expect your developer to do both the development and the testing of it, awesome. Just make sure that they understand that. Where things break is if you expect your developer to do the portion of it, they estimate the development aspect of it, but then you have a whole testing section that is just not part of it, right? It's a different individual. Well, you got to be specific there. You got to be very conscious of the fact that if you're going to divide the work into 2 people, then maybe you want to divide the story into 2 stories so that you do have the appropriate estimation, right? Because I just see way too many people estimate just the development part, but they expect the entire life cycle of that story to be completed within the sprint. And so you're given a false sense of reality, a false sense of expectation, really, when you go to estimate your story and you estimate correctly your development aspect of it, but you didn't consider the design or the testing part of it. So keep that in mind, that I'm a big fan of making individualized stories per role. So if I need a design aspect to happen first, I'll create a design story, my development story, and then my testing story. That's my preferred method, and I link them together with the epics. Alternatively, you can say, no, Alex, we want the whole thing to be in the same sprint. So we want a design step, we want a development step, and we want a testing step to be part of our workflow. Awesome. Awesome. I'm totally for it. But this next one, small, is now even more critical for you, right? Because whatever you do now, if you're going to force that all the steps of your workflow have to be completed. So we have to have the design, we have to have the development, we have to have the development testing, we have to have the QA testing, right? Maybe UAT. And if you're saying all of these steps need to be completed before the end of the sprint, awesome, nothing wrong against that. But you got to think much, much smaller, because all of those steps have to be done in 2 weeks for multiple stories. And so your team is going to be stretched very thin. And so now you want to think as small as humanly possible so that you can increase your chances of success with respect to all the different things that need to happen without losing value, without rolling over to the next sprint. And then finally, testable. I think a lot of teams usually don't think about testing. I think a lot of folks focus on the development part of it, right? They focus on, okay, what do we need to build? What needs to get done? Awesome. That part's little bit more well known. But I would challenge you to think about your testing, right? When you're creating your story, how are you going to test it? And are you defining acceptance criteria? And this is a huge thing. And I would highly recommend that you are leveraging acceptance criteria in all your stories, because what we haven't discussed about is like fields that we put in our stories. um, and make sure that you have valid and valuable acceptance criteria so that when the story is done, you can do that verification. Does it explode? This should be a test for everything. Yeah, so fun fact, I used to work in the defense world. And when you have a bug, when you have a bug which is treated the same as a story in the eyes of Jira, right? It follows very similar behaviors and patterns, and when it comes again to rules of Jira. But when you add a bug, my favorite test is always: is anybody going to die? Right? Will it explode? Will we have catastrophic failure? Um, and if the answer is yes, then you drop everything you're doing and fix it, right? And so I like this one. Does it explode? But anyways, folks, that's what invest is, right? So this is what you want to be considering. So hopefully in the chat, let me know. Have you ever thought about it, right? Does this help? Does this give you any perspective? Let me know what you're thinking in the chat, right? Because at the end of the day, you want every story to have like a reason. You want it to have a purpose. You want it to be something that is important for you and your team, right? And it's important for you to think this way. You want to start with why and set these tones of, is this a valuable story? Are we going to get business out of it? Yeah. Okay, cool. Is it estimatable? Right? Can my team confidently give it this a number? Is it small enough? Is it testable enough? Right? And I think that's very, very important that you and your team consider these things here. Now, what else do I want to tell you about invest? Let's see if there's anything else here. So we're gonna get into a little bit more of this. So I'm gonna drop this link actually so you guys can all read through it. It gives you a little bit more on the what's the independent, the negotiable, the valuable. I gave you my perspective. I gave you my 2 cents on it, but there's a podcast here that you can hear about it, and then there's gonna be again a couple more stuff here. So let's drop this into the chat here, and you guys can go take away. Okay. Susan says, great walkthrough, not just what, but also why. Awesome. Do you believe in the golden 1 point story? Not really, but here's gonna be my 2 cents. So let's pause here for a second to talk about, should we estimate stories or not? So here's where shout out to Catapult here and Retros, right? I think this is gonna be another little moment here that I want to have a little heart to heart with you. Nothing's perfect, right? Every team is dynamic. There is no right answer. There's no silver bullet, and there's no magical pill that you can take that's going to make your projects and your team deliver more effectively. Invest will help, right? Having the right mindset, having the right solid understanding of like, okay, so how do we at least make stories that are good? That starts making you move in the right direction. But again, shout out to Retros and Catapult Labs here, because what you ultimately want to do is, you as a team, you want to reflect. You want to look at your process, your individuals that are on your team, and go, where are we going wrong? And this gets really, really tricky because I love retros. I think retros is one of the best things in the world, but I don't think we're trained, especially when you have technical team members. Human people skills are not really high on our skill board, right? And so it's very easy to turn a retrospective into some sort of of a blame game, right? And once your retrospectives turn into a blame game, retrospectives lose their value. But the only way to really understand, are we trending in the right direction? Is my team doing things correctly or incorrectly, is to have retrospectives. And the reason I'm even bringing up retrospectives is because of this golden 1 point story, right? What I see a lot of teams do is they try story points, but it doesn't work. They don't they just can't, right? They have a lot of challenges. They just can't figure out story points for whatever reason. And so they default to, well, every story is a 1 pointer, right? Because you treat each story as just an individual item unit of one, which is okay, right? Jira actually works for that, right? You can actually do your burn downs based on issue count. And so you treat every story equal. But that's where you get into trouble because not every story is worth 1 point. Now, my 2 cents, my observations, and this kind of adds to the context of the golden 1 point story. I believe that every story, again, these are just my opinions, folks. You can feel free to fight me in the chat if you want. But my personal belief is that every story that you and your team are working on should be a 1, 2, or a 3. And what I mean by that is it shouldn't take more than a couple of days to complete any story. The moment your team members are taking 3 days, 5 days, a week and a half, 2 weeks to complete a story, that story violated that invest principle because that story is just too big, right? It's too big. It's not um estimatable correctly, right? Like it's not the right story. And so I would challenge you to have retrospectives to reflect on what are we doing as a team, because and if you haven't taken a agile training or a scrum training, there's a fundamental differences between your sprint demo, sprint review, and your sprint retrospective. The demo is there to validate and verify. I heard you wanted me to build XYZ. I built XYZ. Did we hit the mark? Is what you said and what you put in the acceptance criteria what I built and what I tested against? If the answer is yes, awesome. We move on to the next one, right? But that's what that's what the sprint demo, sprint review is for. When you're looking at your retrospective, you don't really talk about, oh, you built the story wrong, right? Like you built the wrong thing. That's for the demo. In the retrospective, it's like what Ronnie has here, right? It's internal. It's is your team communicating effectively? Did your team challenge, right? Did your team raise their hand and go, I don't understand this, and everybody ignored it, right? Like it's an intra reflection of how your team is operating. I would recommend before you get too far into retrospectives to have team building activities because you want to have a strong team that trusts each other. Because when you don't, when you have some frictions, that little spark is going to turn into a big flame very, very quickly. And you're going to want to turn away from retrospectives, which is then going to make you have crappier stories because you're not going to be thinking about how can we improve as a team. So it's all related. It's all kind of bundled into one dynamic of the team. I feel like you fix team dynamics by having better retros. Sounds like Alex needs a retro lesson featuring a retrospective Master King Bob. Yeah. So let's talk next week after I have a session with King Bob here, and we'll see how our retrospective goes. But retros are fun. I think they're hard. They're challenging. They're hard, right? It's nobody likes to be told that they did something wrong. But this is again why you need good trust on the team. Um, luckily, there's a lot of ways to build trust, and there's a lot of activities and stuff that you can do to get better as a team. Having team powwows, barbecues at your house, those are great ways to build camaraderie, and that really help out when you're doing a retrospective. So take that as it is. Okay, so we're about halfway through here, and we have our good understanding of our stories, specifically when it comes to um, invest principle. So now let's jump into Jira. I'm going to come over here into Jira, and I'm going to create a brand new epic. Now, please ignore the fact that my thing says feature. I did a presentation at Team 25. I decided to rename my epics into features. This is not a Jira thing. Please do not freak out. This is something I intentionally changed on my Jira. I need to make a Jira ticket to fix that. And I got to put it back. But this should say create epic on your side. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create a brand new epic. And I'm going to create an epic that says allow users to manage their profile. And so in my description, right, so we're going to have a business goal, which is let users update personal details to keep their accounts current. So it's a pretty valuable thing to do, especially if you have any kind of a website where a user needs to create an account. You want them to be able to manage their profiles. So we have an epic. Awesome. So what do our stories look like, right? And so here's where we can now start decomposing our stories. And you're going to want to go through this exercise of invest, right? So I'm going to start off with story number 1, and we're going to break it down. So I'm going to hit enter here. And so my very first story here on the right-hand side is, as a user, I want to view my profile details so I can see my current information, right? Now, this is pretty vague, I think, in my opinion, right? But this is a good step in the right direction where you want to start calling out, well, what information do you want, right? Now, not everything needs to be in the title. So I think there's also a balance that we need to strike between what goes in the title, your summary of the ticket, versus what goes in the description. So for example, these are some of the things that I would put in either the description or the acceptance criteria, where we have page loads with existing data, user data, and this includes the name, email, and profile picture. And so when we talk about current information, all I want to do is I want to create the capability so that a user can load a page that includes their name, email, and profile picture. So just those 3 simple things. And so when you take that, right, we can cross-reference that with our independent. Does this story depend on other things? Well, technically, yes. It depends on data. The data needs to exist, right? And so we're either going to link to a previous story that happened already, right? We might have had a story in a previous sprint or 2 that built the database, right? Built the infrastructure. Or B, under this particular epic, we're then going to create a story that says build out database for profile details, right? And so this right here is is something that needs to get done as part of this epic. That's probably going to be done by a different team member or a different department, right? Because sometimes your database folks or back-end folks are different than the front-end folks. Sometimes you're full stack. So it just depends on, again, your team dynamics and how you're all set up there. But I wouldn't want to build the database and build the front end in the same story, because when you start doing that, right, when your description starts including, let's build the database, all the tables, all the schemas that need to happen at the database level, and let's build the front end together in the same story. Well, that's when we start leaving the small, right? This is where we start leaving the testable, because yeah, we can test them both, but we're increasing the scope of that test, right? And so now we need to test databases, and we need to test UIs, and we need to test like forms and stuff of that nature, right? So our test starts becoming bigger and bigger and bigger, which increases that scope, right? So we want to focus on small. And this is why I'm a huge fan of keeping these as separate stories so that you can test and configure and delegate them independently. Again, not always the best practice when you're coming in from the straight world of Agile, but my recommendations usually come from real world scenarios where typically it's going to be 2 different people doing the work anyways. And I love to assign, we'll talk, make sure you come back next month in May, where we talk about how to groom your backlog and start planning your sprints, right? But I'm a huge fan of assigning. But this is kind of how I would tackle this particular story here, right? So you can see we're making some assumptions, right? We're assuming that the database is already built. So let's just actually move it up for the sake of argument. Let's say that has been done, right? So we're just going to move this to done. Awesome. So under that epic, we see that the database has been done. So if we just take it at face value, we're building a page that is extracting data from the database that includes the name, email, and profile picture. That's great. That's already done. So it's independent, right? We don't need to depend on anything else because the database has already been created. All the data is already in there, right? Awesome. Now, is it negotiable? Well, what if you want to see the name, the first and last name, right? What if just name is too vague? Well, that's kind of on the negotiation part, right? Like, do we make subtle tweaks to add value to the user, right? Maybe we don't have an ability to update your profile picture. So maybe we want to create a feature story that will allow the user to update their profile picture, right? And so again, you wouldn't want to negotiate and build it into this one because that's increasing the scope significantly, right? Adding key functionality of being able to edit profile pictures, maybe something that's going to take more than a few hours, I would create a new story. But again, the negotiation is, well, what if being able to edit a profile picture is a 20-minute thing, right? Well, in that case, yeah, let's negotiate and let's tweak the scope of the story a little bit, right? So that we can get that win as well. Again, there's no perfect way here, folks. There's no right or wrong way. That beauty is in the eye of the beholder, which again, have those retrospectives, have your retrospective so that you can tweak and figure out, can my team pivot? And if not, then maybe you don't encourage your team to pivot, right? Estimatable. If I'm a developer, if I'm a front end developer, this should be my bread and butter, right? This should be stuff that I do day in and day out. And I should be able to go, you know what? This sounds just about right. I've done this before. And so you should be able to come down to your story points and give it a 3. Now, with that said, we are going to come back next month and talk about story point values. And so don't freak out if you don't know what a 3 or a 1 or a 2 are. This is going to play a critical role in next month's session as well. But let me give you a teaser. Let me show you what I think about story points. Now, this is not something you should take to heart. These are one man's opinions, and I'm saying this because boy, do I get a lot of hate when it comes time to talking about story points. So let me see if I actually have my story points out here somewhere. I might not have them. Let's see if I actually have them. Bear with me. Let's see. Do I have story points? I have that. Team operations, workflows. Oh boy, I do not have my story points in this one. Well, how about we build it out? Let's talk about story points. Actually, I have it in Miro. So if everybody can give me 1 second, let me go to my Miro. This is a long time ago that I built this. So let me see if I can even log into my Miro. I really got to bring it into my Jira here. Wow, it's been a minute since I logged into Miro. It's been hopefully this works. I'm not 100% sure that I'm going to walk into the right Miro. Everybody give me a second. I'm logging into Miro off screen and just trying to make sure it does not look like nope, this is definitely not my Miro. I'm gonna have to log in. Okay, so you know what? Let's just build it here. Let's put an example here. We're gonna talk about story points since I'm gonna need it for next month anyways. Story points. Here's what I recommend to you all, folks. You all need to have a solid understanding of story points because when you're estimating each story, which again, we're gonna go through the dynamics of estimation again in the next session. But I want you to be thinking about story points because estimating inside of Jira is very, very important. I think again, a lot of teams change this. A lot of teams are freaked out by story points and skip it all together. Sounds like Alex needs a retro lesson featuring a red. Oh, sorry. What scope creeps favorite dance move? The backlog shuffle. What if I prefer t-shirt sizing? So let's talk about that. So let's do this. Story points versus t-shirts, t-shirt sizing, right? And here's my 2 cents, okay? I like to put story points on my story, on my task, and my bug. And I realized I made this way too big, okay? I like to put t-shirt sizing on my epics. That's my philosophy. And so what does t-shirt sizing look like for me? Well, I like to do the following. I'm going to put 2 triangles here or 2 rectangles. Here we go. So we're going to create one. I hate gray. I don't know why Atlassian always picks gray for everything. Right? And so for your story points, we're going to zoom in here. We have a 1, a 2, a 3, a 5, an 8, a 13, and a 21. That is tiny. Okay, how to make you bigger? Here we go. Heading 1. That is still not big enough. Okay. Oh boy, Atlassian, we need a new feature here. We need to be able to make our colors bigger here. Okay. So a story point of 1 to me, that's usually a like 30 minutes to an hour, super fast, easy. Everything is known. Right? You should know everything, right? It shouldn't take you maybe 30 minutes, a few minutes, an hour 2 hours tops. It should be quick, right? You should be able to look at a story. You should be able to look at any story that's a one and just go, yes, I know how to do this. Right? Without a shadow of a doubt, that is something you've done so many times. You can do it in your sleep. Your 5-year-old can do it. Everybody can do it. It's just so simple, so easy. Everything you have, everything you need, and you can just simply look at a story and in your gut, in your pit of your gut, you go, yes, I know how to do this. Okay, without an ounce of a doubt. That's a one. When you can have that, right? If you all make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and I ask you, can you make me a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and estimate how long it's going to take you to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? That should be a one. If you've been making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches since you were a little kid, and now you're an adult, and you've had years and years and years and years and years and years of practice making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, then you should very easily be able to estimate how long it takes you to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Okay, so but notice that I'm doing a hybrid here. Notice that I have a hybrid between time and complexity. Fast, 30 minutes, and complexity is super fast, super easy, right? Everything is known. The complexity levels are the lowest possible complexity you can possibly have, right? Now, as we get into the two, right, we get into a couple of hours, right? It's fast, easy, but I have a couple of unknowns, right? You're going to have to figure something out, but it's still fast. It's still easy. You know what? I'm going to change this to I may have a couple of unknowns, right? But a two is going to be like you're almost there, but you know it's going to take you a couple of hours, right? You're going to need maybe it's something you come in and do first thing in the morning, and by lunch we're done, right? Again, super easy. Well, maybe not super easy, but it's still easy. It's still going to be fast, and it's going to take you a couple of hours, right? But that's the sweet spot, right? And then the threes are going to be like about a day or two to complete, right? So it's going to be slower now, right? It's going to be easy-ish, right? We start getting a little bit harder. We start getting a little bit more complex, right? And we have some unknowns. We have some unknowns, right? And we just don't know, right? We things start getting a little bit more fuzzy. The things start getting a little bit more blurry, and you have a couple of dots. You know that there's dots there. You know that you're missing some dots, but you have an idea. You have a good sense of direction. You kind of know what you're gonna go do, but you know you're gonna need at least a day or two. You're gonna have to talk to some people, but we're adding complexity, right? And so this is how you think about this. Now we'll come back and finish this in the future in next month's session, right? But what I want to leave you off with is you should also have the 21, right? Which means full sprint, right? You need the whole time, you need all of it, right? Not easy at all, super complex, too many unknowns. I have no idea what I'm doing, right? And when your team gives you a 21, that is for you to go, okay, we need to break this down. Now, Ronnie brings up a controversial option here. Any story 13 or above hasn't sufficiently been broken down. Yeah, so I would agree, right? I would say if we start kind of finishing this build out, right, you're going to see that, okay, so I changed my mind. Maybe we do build them all out. We got 10 minutes, right? And so I would say this is going to be a half a sprint, right? This is going to be like let's see. So we got 2 to 3 days, 1 to 2 days. This is going to be 3 to 5 days, right? This 3 to 5 days, sprint and a half, right? So we're talking like 5 to 7 days, and then the most of sprint here is going to be, the 7 to 10 days that the sprint is, and then the 21 is like full sprint, right? So anything that's going to take most of this, I can't even spell sprint. Anything that's going to take most of the sprint, if not the entire sprint, which is again that 13, that 21, that to me, my friends, is trouble. That is yelling trouble. And so when you're creating your stories and your story here, right, and the description that you put in your title and your description, your acceptance criteria, if your team's coming back and going, this is going to be a 21, you need to stop. That is a full stop and go, what is up with this story? What about this story is so complex, so ambiguous, so causing so many dependencies and unknowns that you feel the developer compelled to give me the highest possible number we have. And that right there is, again, you're clear. We need to stop this particular story and figure out how do we break it down. Now, I will call BS on teams that say we can't break stories down. I think if you are coming from the camp of, oh, our stories are just this WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get, we can't break it down anymore, because to break it down makes it illogical. Well, again, I would say maybe talk to your team and have a retrospective because that should not be the case. You should be able to you should always be able to break something down. Um, I don't see there being opportunities where a story is so complex that you can't break it down. Like, you should always be able to break these things down. Okay. So that's that one. So now, where does t-shirt come into play, right? So again, I have my story points are for stories, tasks, and bugs, and then my t-shirt sizings for epics. So I treat my epics very similar. So I'm going to put something like this. So I do extra small /1. I do a small /a 2. I do a medium /3. I do a large /5. I do an extra large /8, an extra extra large /13. And then if you're like Fluffy, we got the triple XL. Then that's like, whoa. If you guys have ever seen, no, Fluffy says, dang. Right? So if you're like Fluffy, you want to be very, very careful with those triple XLs, right? Because your team is just crying for help at that point if they're giving you anything that's that big. So this is how we do t-shirt sizing versus my story points. But again, I like to put this. The reason I like to do the t-shirt sizing at the t-shirt size or at the epic level is because you have a lot more unknowns, right? When you're creating just the epic, right? If we go back to our example over here, allow users to manage their profile as an epic. You're like, what the heck? Like, what do I got to do here? We don't know yet, right? You need to have some discovery. You need to have some architecture review meetings. You need to sit down with your technical leads and figure it out. But if you're estimated at the beginning, at the inception of an epic, it's hard. And so everything, in my opinion, is like an extra large or bigger, right? Epics are supposed to be big. It's in their name, epic, big. And so that's that. Okay. So that's kind of how we break these up, right? So my recommendation would be, you want to add your stories, right? You want to add your stories here, and you want to just continue to add stories, and you want to, just be tactical with this, right? Take advantage um, of your acceptance criteria. Take advantage of your description to add information into these stories so that you can have valuable stories that are going to benefit your team, right? And so I'm just going to add a couple more here, because next month, what we're going to do is we're going to take these stories that we're creating and we're going to learn how to rank them. We're going to learn how to work with them in our backlog, because right now you'll notice that I'm in the timeline view. I haven't gone into my backlog just yet. We're going to go into the backlog. That's something that's coming. Again, make sure you subscribe to the channel here if you haven't subscribed yet, right? But we're going to take these items here and we're going to break them down, and we're breaking them down right now, right? But you need to have breaking them down, because guess what? Epics don't go into your backlog at all. And so everything needs to be either a story, a task, or a bug. All right. And so last couple of things here that as we start winding down is, what's the difference then between a story and a task? And because when you hit the create button, Jira gives you the option to create a story, task, and a bug, right? And I want you to go back and remember about that valuable thing. When you're creating something that you expect your team to deliver, when you know that your team's going to make money, right? The business is going to make money. That is what I like to define as my story. When you have something that you know your team needs to do, it's a necessary evil, something that needs to be completed, right? So to allow users to manage your profile, right, you need to stand up. Rodney, what's your favorite type of database? I'm going to go with it's Postgres. But Rodney, please let me know if Postgres is not your favorite type of database. But let's just say we're going to set up a Postgres, right, DB for managing user profiles, right? Notice that this right here is a task. Now you may be asking, well, Alex, what's the difference between this task and this story to build out the database? Well, one of them is literally standing it up, is installing, right? One of them is going to be install the Postgres on a server, right? Maybe you got to set up whatever AWS options are given to you from a database perspective, right? But the activity is that you got to do the thing where you actually buy the product, right? Over here, we're building the tables. We're building the relationships that you got to put into your database, right? And so one can be more valuable than the other. It's really up to you. You could treat them as stories, you can treat them as tasks, but this is why you should have good definitions, because when it comes time to, Alex, should something be a story, should something be a task, it's super critical that you have a good definition built in that works for you and your team. How you define those, again, I will point you back to the retrospectives so that you can see what works or doesn't work for you and your team, and you make a determination there. Okay, so I think that's kind of where we want to be at. Oh, one last thing, bottom up versus top down. So everything I've been showing you right now is bottom up. Oops, scratch that. Scratch that last second. Everything I've been teaching you right now is top down. We start with the epic, and we're building the tree down. What happens, folks, if you jump into a project and you already have stuff in your backlog, but no epics? Right? What happens when we have just a bunch of stories and tasks and bugs already in Jira, but we don't have an epic? Well, the first question is, should every story, task, or bug have an epic? And the answer is, it depends. Here's my 2 cents on epics versus stories. At the end of the day, the story is what your developer, what that individual contributor is going to do. Okay. The story, I'm going to repeat that one more time. At the end of the day, the story, the task, or the bug, that is what you assign to an individual, and that is what actually gets built. Okay? You actually do that, right? This is the thing that actually gets completed by the person is going to be that story, that task, or that bug. The epic is a container. It's a way to group your stories together. And so a different way that I like to describe that is that your epic gives your stories purpose, which is what we begin with at the beginning, which was, let's talk about why, right? The epic gives your stories, why are we doing this? What's the purpose of this particular story? And so it's totally cool to just have stories or tasks in Jira that just exist. The world's not going to end. But you got to ask yourself, what is the point of this story or task? And if we don't tie it to an epic, why is my team investing time, energy, calories, and effort into this particular task or story if I don't have a clear direction upstream to its intended purpose? And so I'll leave you with that as like food for thought, right? Like, you want to challenge yourself. If you're saying, Alex, well, not all my stories or tasks have to belong to an epic, and I'm like, cool, but then why do you have the epic? I mean, sorry, why do you have the story? Why does that story exist, right? And so as Tyler here says, right, like, it gives your stories purpose, right? Because at the end of the day, money, time, resources, right? Your developers are a finite resource. Your money is a finite resource. Your schedule is a finite resource. You don't want to waste it, right? You don't want to waste it just building stuff and being busy. I mean, you can, but that's when you don't get traction. You want to help add some gravel, right? If you're in that snow or that dirt and you're just spinning your wheels, you want to add some traction, and the epic helps give you some traction. So again, food for thought. I'm not here to sway you one way or another. I would only recommend that you, again, check out those retrospectives, right? Do a retrospective and figure out what works for you and your team, and kind of go from there. So with that said, we're going to transition out of here and kind of go into our offer. So folks, let me give you a little rundown of my personal life. Can you tie? Yes. So Finur, this is coming up. We're so Atlassian. So this ties perfectly to my. Let me tell you about my personal life a little bit. So Atlassian just had their Team 25 conference. They announced some new stuff, specifically something called Focus, and they're revamping the way goals work a little bit more. So I don't know how to explain this. This is my love-hate relationship with Atlassian, because we're in a transitionary period right now within Atlassian where goals are going to become much more predominant. They're going to become much more useful, but we're transitioning. Atlassian is slow to roll transitions. So I can't recommend something right now. But ideally, your stories go to the epics, which then go to the goal. So you have the traceability upstream. It might not be story to goal, but the way I do it today, I have a couple of steps. I have like the story goes to the epic, that goes to the initiative, and then goes to the goal. But ultimately, again, all I'm a believer, right? If I put my CEO hat on, I'm a believer that any and all work that my team does should have a purpose, should have a reason, right? My team shouldn't just be doing things for the sake of being busy. That's not a good, healthy way to run a business. So keep that in mind. All right. So the other thing that you got to know then, right, is so I'm going to drop the link here because my PowerPoint's out of date here. I have been running around. We went to the Alaskan conference last week, and so been super, super busy. But guess what? I actually have nothing to do today. I have a lot of time. I finished up some client work. I have some clients that I take care of 5 o'clock in the morning. And so if you need Jira help, if you need help with Jira, just keep in mind that I am available to help you with your Jira problem. So if any of this, if you're like, Alex, I just need a little bit of coaching, I'm not really sure what to do here, I highly recommend reach out to me. I got a 15-minute question here, an hour. If you need more than an hour, we can set something up. But I'm here to help you out. And so keep this in mind that that link tree is there so that if any of this is confusing to you or you just need some one-on-one time or you need to bring me into your company to help you out, this is what I do. Call me, get a hold of me, connect with me on LinkedIn. Let's chat. I'd be more than happy to help. Right. But the other thing is, now that I have some time, I finally have time to build my courses out. So what's gonna come here is if you buy this course, it's $12.99, right? Normally $90. But if you buy this course today, which is my Jira fundamentals, I'm gonna give you 2 free things. I'm gonna give you 1 free 15-minute session with me, and 2, you're going to get the Jira for Scrum Masters course when it drops on Udemy. So you're gonna basically get 3 things for that $13. You're gonna get the fundamentals course, the Jira for Scrum Masters, which is gonna drop. I'm gonna push this thing real hard. So it's gonna drop within the next month. And then you're gonna get that 15-minute session, which is a $50 value by itself. So make sure you take advantage of that. Next, we are well on our way. We're more than a third of the way through here. And so we have a lot of courses to offer still. So make sure you sign up for my other courses. So if you haven't signed up, I just dropped a link there to where you can basically sign up for the rest of them. So if you enjoyed this class, I have many, many, many more. And so we have more than half a year's worth of content here. And so make sure you're signing up for all of them. Make sure you're telling your coworkers, your peers, tell everybody you know about them. And then finally, I would just say if you take away anything from this is make sure you follow me on LinkedIn. I was putting all the Team 25 coverage there. So if you're interested in any of that stuff, make sure you follow me on LinkedIn. I also have a merch store. We have some pretty cool stuff. We have some new shirt designs coming out, very inspired by Team 25. So keep an eye out for new merch. We like to do the nerdy stuff here. And go subscribe to the Jira Life. We will be dropping an interview on Thursday that you're definitely going to want to watch and not miss out on. This was a holy grail type of opportunity for us here at the Jira Life. And so we're very, very proud and very, very excited to share this one with the world. And so make sure you go subscribe over to the Jira Life. So with that said, folks, I will see you all next month and have a great day. Bye.